road.
Is your wife still here?
Yeah.
I'm the man in the house. No.
And I've never heard anyone say anything bad about her.
Well, that's because I've murdered those people.
Right?
Is that kids are obese, and one way to get them away from that is get out in the outdoors. You mean my mom used to kick us out, and we said we could not come back till the sun was down.
Same here.
And that was
Get
normal.
out of my house.
The only thing that you weren't supposed to do is fall in the river and drown.
My parents would do that in the pouring rain.
Yeah.
Hello, all right. You're listening to the Gritty Bowmen, home of gritty bow hunting films, interviews, tall tales, and a wee bit of manly boasting.
I'm South Cox, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowmen.
All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Bowmen podcast. I'm here with Aron Snyder, and we are going to do a Shelters podcast. And this is the millionth attempt at this podcast. And
somebody buried our underwear in our front yard. We couldn't leave the house. Brian sounded like a chipmunk the first time. We can't get good enough internet connection to do audio, and we just did about 10 minutes of this one, and Brian forgot to push record.
Yeah, it's
got a little bad luck going for us.
It's a little doozy. Someone is this podcast. We're gonna get it out today, though. We're gonna go ahead and do audio only because we can't get the video to work. But for those of you who are watching the podcast, we are going to put 1 million Aron Snyder shelter pictures into the podcast. So as you're watching it, you won't be able to see Aron's lovely face, but you will see photographs of different shelters that Aron has taken photographs of throughout his illustrious backcountry career. How's that sound?
Sounds good, and I have a bad hair day today. Anyway, I can chew now and no one can see. This is a win-win. This is a victory in my book.
Okay, before we get started on the podcast, we are going to do a giveaway. We've been talking about doing a giveaway for a while, and today we're giving away the prizes we got from Rokslide, which is a kill kit and a zebra light headlamp. So Aron, tell us about Rokslide and these two items.
So Rokslide, Rokslide.com, ROKSLIDE.com. The reason why there's a C missing isn't because Ryan Avery started it from North Idaho and he can't spell. That's not the reason. Someone else took that name. So it's ROKSLIDE.com. It's a mountain hunting website. I strongly urge you to get on there if you're doing any kind of backpack hunting, looking for any gear, anything like that. Is heavily weighted towards the mountain backpack hunter or just mountain hunting, horse hunter, anything like that. It is the hot spot for that type of hunting. Ryan Avery and Robbie Denning own it, two great guys. I started it initially. I got too busy and sold my portion to those guys. I still contribute. But Robbie and Ryan run a great show. Robbie's killed more mule deer than who'd have thought it. And Ryan, even though he's short for his weight, a lot of people don't know this, has killed, I think, 17 bulls with a stick bow. I don't know how many cows. A couple out there at a mile with a long gun. And they talk about all of those things from long distance shooting, stick bow shooting, everything on Rokslide. It's a great place. As far as the kill kit goes, that's something I started, 3 years ago, where I had a specific amount of game bags, 550 cord, Havalon knife, rubber gloves, marking ribbon. I had all of that in one little medium pull-out from Kifaru International. It doesn't weigh very much. It's got bomb bags from Pristine Ventures. They're T.A.G bags, basically, technologically advanced game bags. Those are the bags that are inside the kill kit. Anyway, that is something they sell on Rokslide. They donated one of those. The Zebra light is just a badass light. That's a company out of Texas. They make multiple models, but it's a pretty rock solid bomb-proof headlamp. Some of them take single A, double A, some are rechargeable 123s, a bunch of different types of headlamps. But they're out of Texas. They're American-made, great headlamp. They also donated one of those. So it's a couple pretty cool items.
Yep. And our winner for this giveaway is Saxy_Wilderbeest, Cameron Saxon, off of Instagram. So we'll connect with Cameron and get him his his prize, and then we'll do some. We're gonna just select. We're gonna alternate. Next time we do the giveaway, we're gonna pick someone off of Facebook. We're just gonna go back and forth and start liquidating all the prizes that we've got on hand. We got a few more. Like we got a dozen arrows from Black Eagle. We've got some gear from First Light, Corey Miller at Triple X.
Prototype, brand new, never seen before backpack coming from Kifaru, which I'm excited about.
Yep. So we got a ton of stuff, folks. So we're gonna just start giving stuff away over the next few weeks. So get on there if you haven't followed us on Instagram or Facebook. Get out there and get on there, and we're just gonna randomly start picking names from there. I have no idea who Saxy Wildebeest is, but I look forward to sending him a prize. Other than that, Aaron, I've got some new shirts and hats. Well, I got some new shirts, new styles up on the website. We got a bunch of new inventory of Gritty Bowmen gear. So for all you guys out there that are listening, go out there and get some hats and shirts and support the show if you like it, and help us get some revenue in here to keep the show going. It helps a lot. And same with VHX. I uploaded our hunting film from last year's Full Draw Film Tour to VHX. It's out there. I have not added the bonus footage to it yet. I'm still editing up some of that last minute stuff, but it should be up there and by the end of the week. And but for those of you who can't wait, the film is there, and so that'd be cool too. Download the film and help us help support the podcast. Anyway, that's it. Aaron, take it away, brother. Let's talk shelters.
First, for shelters, everybody go get on Brian's, the Gritty Bowmen or Brian's Instagram page, one and the same, and like his page. We're racing to 10,000. I am ahead of him, but I got to give him, he's got 17 kids and 2 jobs. He needs as much help as he can get. Go like his Instagram page and like mine too, but like his first.
Dude, it's hard to compete with Aron Snyder. I mean, you're the photograph king. Instagram is made for you. I'm going to give it a go, but you've already got me by like 2,000 followers, Aaron.
I just started getting on because I run several of them, and a couple of them I had somebody take over.
Yeah,
and
I hate you.
That happened. I got to take mine back and actually post.
Well, that's the thing is you started posting 2 weeks ago, and I think you picked up 1,000 a week. What the heck, man? How can I compete with that?
6,000 in like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But I've also gotten a little flack because I may get a little trigger happy with the post thing, and I'll be going through photos, and I'm like, oh, that one's awesome. I'll post, and next thing you know, I'm like, man, I just posted 6 in a row. Crap. I got to spread it out a little bit.
That's what I was going to say. You've angered a few people clogging up their feed.
Potentially, I have lost a few followers, but I have gained many. So it's as long as it's a net gain, right? That's what you're looking for, the net gain.
That's right. All right. Well, yeah, folks, go out there and follow us on Instagram if you can, and help me beat Aaron. That would be nice. It's not likely, but that would be nice. So
I'm getting unfriended by a bunch of people.
I was going to say the best way to do this is unfriend Aaron and follow Brian.
Dang it. Okay. Don't do that. All right. Shelters. So Brian had mentioned we've had a little issues with this podcast. We gave it a whirl once and Brian sounded like a chipmunk. But we've got it down pat now of how we want to do it to simplify it. And I've got a little storyboard I wrote out. I think the best way is I'm going to go over a description of different shelter systems from bivvy to tarp all the way up to 4-season shelter, go over a little bit of the lingo. And then I'm going to start breaking down what would be best for what shelter is going to be best for specific, hunts, specific times of the year. And then go over a couple options of like the one do-all shelter, which is just about impossible, but a couple options to get you as close as you possibly can to a one system do everything type of a shelter. So first, we'll start out from the kind of the bottom to the top. basically a bivvy. You're a bivvy, which there's multiple types of bivvies, but a bivvy is kind of it's not at the bottom of the list because of its, well, it does a bivvy does suck, but it's only at the bottom of the list because it's the smallest. A bivvy stack is basically a waterproof coffin. Some of them have hoops in them to give you a little room. Some of them don't. They do set up in a matter of about throwing it out of your bag. It takes no time at all. There's some pros and cons to those. With a bivvy, one of the biggest issues you'll run into, and Brian, you dive in at any time if you used a bivvy, but you can get serious amount of condensation in a bivvy sack with some of the different types of fabrics. I won't go into the different fabric names that do get condensation, but I will say I've had the best luck with an E-vent bivvy, a bivvy sack made of E-vent. It's little e, capital V, E-N-T, E-vent. That stuff breathes fairly well. Now, you can find really lightweight bivvies, down in that 5-ounce range that are made of basically like a steel nylon that's not waterproof. And the idea is to keep some of the condensation from the inside of a tarp out. The only thing that's bad about that, there's several things bad about that, but if you're going to bring a bivvy and bring extra weight, you might as well go for the gusto and have one that you can sleep in without a tarp, where these super lightweight bivvies, you can't really do that. If it rains, bag's going to get wet anyway. So bivvy sack, ultralight, kind of a coffin, very simplistic, not very cheap for the good ones. You can spend $300 on a bivvy real quick. There's generally a little bit of weight savings unless you get a tarp, and then it kind of evens itself out to some shelters. We'll go over that in a minute. And you're looking at anywhere from $89 to $329 for a bivvy, and anywhere from 5 ounces to, I've got a Rab Ridgemaster bivvy. I believe it's 2 pounds, 6 ounces, I think. It's pretty heavy. So everything in between.
So, Aaron, from my perspective, and it's limited. It's not like yours, but, let's hear your opinion. But to me, I just don't see the point in a bivvy anymore, given the quality shelters that are there available at the weights they come in at now.
The only time, I would agree with you most of the time for that, the only time a bivvy and a tarp are, I would say, worthwhile is when you are on the side of a mountain, you can only find a deer bed, and you are going to get really inclement weather. Sometimes that will make it worth it because the bivvy goes up real quick. You're at 12,800 feet. You want to have enough cover over your head that you can, have some of your gear outside of it, but you also want to be able to button up to get out of the wind, things like that a tarp may not do. A bivvy tarp setup is extremely versatile. It's just a lot of times just leaves the bivvy at home. Having both is a great idea. Taking both all the time is not needed. A lot of times you can just leave the bivvy at home, which is actually the next thing we're going to talk about is the bivvy tarp setup, and Brian does bring up a very good point.
So if there's going to be, that's the thing is you can look at the weather all you want, but at 12,000 feet, you can't really predict it that well.
No, you can't. And I mean, the thing is a lot of this will have to depend on the duration of the stay. Like if you're only staying a couple nights, you can muscle your way through just about anything. Mm-hmm. But long-term things there's a lot of, you basically have to assess the situation. There's a lot of things that get involved in picking out a shelter, and you don't want to you don't want to, I try to simplify things more than confuse things. To me, if I'm in Colorado, I'm going to be in a place where I'm going to, more than most likely be sleeping in a deer bed. Weather's going to probably suck. I'm usually going to throw in a Rab Alpine bivvy. It's made of E-vent, doesn't have a hoop, weighs like 13.5 ounces, just to be safe, to go down on my tarp, and then I may take that with me throughout the day if I'm taking off away from my main camp. It's all pluses and minuses. You're adding almost a pound of weight. You're getting a little bit more security, but most of the time you can leave the bivvy at home. It's not needed.
Okay, makes sense. So, I mean, seems like you can do all of that without the bivy. But if it's just, I guess, if it's raining sideways or whatever, then, or it's real cold, then that extra is nice.
Yeah, it's a lot of times you don't need it, but sometimes you do. Depends on the size of the tarp you have. Depends on how cold you get. If you have if you have a synthetic sleeping bag, basically with a good outer windproof a good outer shell or a good windproof outer shell, a bivvy's not going to be needed hardly ever, because that, no matter if it gets wet or not, a synthetic bag is still going to keep you warm. And then if you have a good windproof outer shell, the bivvy's not needed because it's blocking the wind too. But everything we talk about is a kind of off of a collective of dumb things I have done or Brian has done in the past to kind of live and learn from what mistakes we've made. Sometimes I've brought a tarp and no bivvy and thought, why the hell didn't I bring a bivvy? Because it's snowing sideways now. And, I'm stuck in a little, tiny little 4x8 tarp that I thought would be fine. But, pros and cons to everything, but it is a system that is very viable for some different situations, and something to think about.
Yeah.
That we've kind of covered the bivvy and the bivvy tarp. Basically, the bivvy went over. The bivvy tarp is literally just like it sounds. You take a tarp of whatever size you feel comfortable with, along with the bivvy. You'll have anywhere from an 8 to a 16 ounce increase, unless you're going really crazy, for the tarp weight. And then you basically have your Gore-Tex E-vent coffin underneath the tarp. You pitch the tarp in a bunch of different ways. If you want to leave for the day, you can leave the tarp up, take the bivvy with you as like, quote unquote survival shelter if you get stuck away from camp. It is a very expensive system. If you get a good bivvy and a good tarp, you're looking at $550. I would say is pretty average for both of those systems combined.
Okay.
So the next system is now just a tarp. As simple as it sounds, we talked about this on the last podcast. The tarp can range anywhere, like the ones that Kifaru has, that can pitch into a shelter, a pup tent, an A-frame type of a shelter. You can pitch it flat. You can do just about anything you want with it. They're extremely lightweight. They're very versatile once you get the hang of how to pitch them. And they're pretty solid for 3-season use. There's not really any negative side to them other than bugs. Bugs can be an issue when you run just a tarp. If there's obviously bugs can be an issue if there's bugs around. Brian, in some of the places you've been, and as well as me in British Columbia, Western Washington, and Oregon, Idaho, you can get eaten alive by bugs.
Yeah, you really have to know your area to a degree, because I used to fish on Henry's Fork of the Snake River, just out of Island Park, Yellowstone area, and up in Idaho. And I can remember fly fishing up there, and there's not a mosquito one. Then we went up there one time in the spring, and we hiked in, and it was black clouds of mosquitoes, so thick you couldn't move without just them landing all over your eyes, and you just this cloud, and they were voracious. And I remember climbing inside my tent that night, and I had my Labrador with me, and my buddy. We were in this little 2-man tent, and there was like no room to fit the dog, but we had a nice vestibule. The tent went all the way to the ground, pretty tight, and we had the fly down, and she slept in the vestibule. Plus, she's a big, thick, hairy dog. So I'm like, I didn't think anything of it, right? There's just they weren't even getting in under the vestibule. Well, morning we woke up, and her eyes were swollen shut, and her lips were like gigantic. All that soft skin around her eyes and her muzzle had gotten bit all night. And when I woke up that morning and I was looking, there were just clouds of mosquitoes underneath that had gone underneath that. Even though I pinned that vestibule down to the ground, they still got in somewhere. And so mosquitoes can be a serious issue. Bugs like that can be a serious issue in certain places. And so a floorless shelter, like a tarp, that can be a problem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And, you can also put a bug net bivvy under a floorless shelter, but then you're, stuck to the constraints of now you're in a mesh coffin.
Yeah.
Not a lot. You can get in there and read and everything. You're out of the bugs, which is great. So there's pros and cons to everything, which by the end of this, you're going to be probably more confused than you were. But then I'll give you a couple things to choose from that I think would be great options.
Yeah.
So from the tarp, you now go to the tarp teepee wood stove combo. And we talked about this before, but if you take something like a Kifaru Supertarp, you put an annex, basically an entryway, or a Kifaru megatarp, and put an annex or an entryway on the front of it. For 1 pound, 9 ounces, you can add a titanium, like a cylinder stove, and get that thing 100 degrees inside if you want. Obviously, bugs not an issue if you're bringing a stove, because if you need a stove, the bugs are all dead for the most part. That is a very versatile option.
Now, is that because the heat from the stove is just...
No, if it's cold enough you need a stove, the bugs are probably frozen.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part anyway.
I see what you're saying.
At night they freeze off. So something like that is an option where you can pitch it. If you've got just a flat tarp, the stove's kind of not an option because you can put it in front of the shelter and heat your, I just build a fire if you have a flat tarp. Don't get a stove. But if you have one, a tarp system, tarp teepee type system that you can pitch to the ground with an entry, I can tell you many times we have waited out a snowstorm, dried off our clothes after falling through the river, things like that. And in the case of a super tarp, it's more of a one-man shelter. Beside me, I've got a solid about 24 to 30 inches of room where I can lay out all my gear, put the wood in front of me. I've got the stove. It's about 1 pound, 9 ounces roughly. Cranking that thing with heat and really just weathering out the storm and staying warm and drying all your clothes off. That's a very viable system for 4 seasons because you can, 4 seasons, you got the stove, 3 seasons, you've got just the tarp. Springtime, you can have the stove if you need it. The only downside is bugs. That's going to be the big one. If you're in a real buggy area, that system's not going to be as good. So now we bump up to a 3-season shelter. Now, talk about terminology here a little bit. The difference between a 3-season and a 4-season dual wall shelter is pretty simple. A 3-season dual wall shelter, meaning an outer layer and then an inner layer of the tent. The inner layer of the 3-season shelter is basically all mesh to keep the bugs out. The outer shell is not going to pin all the way to the ground. Usually it's going to be 6 inches or so, 5 inches, whatever the case may be, off the ground. That obviously will have wind can blow under that, which when it's really hot, hence the 3-season portion, it's great. It gets some wind flowing through. It gets really cold. It sucks because the wind's flowing through and the mesh does nothing to stop that. With a 4-season shelter, obviously the outer shell is pinned all the way to the ground. And then the inner material is a more windproof material. It would be a best way to explain it is if you took the outer shell and did not coat that outer shell with waterproof material or impregnate it, that is what the inner shell is made of. So if you took just standard like nylon, because if you take still nylon and take the waterproof coating off of it, you have basically like this super thin kind of material like a synthetic game bag looks like, for a crappy explanation. Mm-hmm. That retains heat very well inside that 4-season shelter on the inner wall.
Right. I've been, and I don't recommend this, but if someone were to bring their gas cook stove inside of a 4-season and turn it on, I mean, if someone were to do that, like Aron Snyder does all the time.
I don't recommend it, but I do it every time I'm in the woods.
Me too. I don't recommend it. It could kill you, but I do it every time I take a 4-season. You can light that gas stove, and that tent will warm up in like a matter of seconds, and it'll retain all that heat. You turn it off, and now you're kind of in a nice, cozy little shelter. But if you do that in a 3-season where the inner part is almost all mesh and the fly doesn't go down, the vest doesn't go down close enough to the ground, you can turn that stove on and it doesn't make a dang bit of difference. You might as well be running it outside because the wind and the heat just doesn't stay inside the shelter. It keeps water out, but it doesn't keep heat in.
Yeah. And that's the thing with a 3-season to 4-season shelter is just sleeping at night. Just your body heat will bump up the temperature 10, 15 degrees. I would guess from what I've tested with a thermometer. Sleeping in a 3-season tent, same conditions. Your tent in the morning when you wake up is probably going to be 15 degrees warmer in a 4-season shelter because it's trapping some of your body heat inside.
Absolutely, there's a huge difference. In fact, like I can sleep inside of a 4-season. I wake up in the morning and it's 15 degrees warmer inside that 4-season than it is outside. When I sleep in a 3-season, it pretty much the temperature inside the 3-season matches the temperature outside. There's really almost no difference.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, the downside to a 4-season tent, the only downside, well, there's three probably. Price, they're usually expensive. They're heavier. And then when it's hot, it's like sleeping in a sauna. It's almost unbearable when it's hot sleeping in a 4-season shelter. Now, in the case of Hilleberg, for example, it's a company that I'm very familiar with and I trust, you can take the inner tent out fairly easily and just use the outer shell. It's still going to be hotter than hell inside, but you can take that inner tent out, just use the outer shell if you're trying to go lightweight. Now,
what about venting? Does the vestibule or the fly have a way to? Yeah. I mean, it seems like you can, like what we would do in a 4-season is we would open those doors up on each side and the wind would blow through. Usually, if you got a door on each side, or it depends on the tent, of course, but it still is a little warm, but not bad when the sun goes down.
No, when the sun goes down, it's fine. I'm having flashbacks of glassing at like 12.7, 12.9 with no trees, little wind, and then wanting to take a nap out of the sun and saying, I'll just hop in my tent. And then it's like 170 degrees in that thing. No matter how much you vent it, you do have to have, venting it does no good if there's no wind as far as cooling it down inside. Yeah. But if you vent it and you have some wind inside, it's great. It's much more doable or much more comfortable to lay in there. Now, when you look at when we're going through all of these options, the biggest reason we're doing this podcast, the main reason is the hundreds of emails Brian and I got after the first podcast where we talked about teepees and tarps a little bit more. And a lot of guys want to know, is there a do-all type of shelter that can cover everything? And the one thing we found after the first podcast where Brian sounded like a chipmunk is there's not. There's just, you can get close, but there's just not one that does everything. Because in the case of, like with me, if it's bow season and I'm hunting up high or hunting wherever, I generally just use a tarp. I have a piece of Tyvek on the ground. I throw my sleeping bag over that. If it's hot, I pinch the tarp flat so the wind's really cranking through. I got a couple feet off the ground. If it's raining, I pitch it to the ground in more of an A-frame so I stay dry. Water doesn't come, well, unless you set it up in a mud puddle or a depression, water doesn't come from the edges into the shelter at all. And it's lightweight. It's like a pound or less.
Yep.
You take that and you add a month of time to it and you're at the end of October and I have no trees around, I'm going to be staying in some type of a Hilleberg shelter. It's warmer. I can't burn any wood. So, a single wall, just a tarp, you're not going to retain much heat in that thing. So I go into a 4-season shelter. Now, if you back it up to the, dead of winter for example, or late season hunting and I'm in the trees, I don't bring a 4-season shelter. I bring a tarp and a stove, or a teepee and a stove, because I can burn wood. And as we mentioned in the last podcast, if you haven't ran some type of a tarp, teepee, stove combo, it is a game changer. Being able to get out of your sleeping bag and have it 70 degrees, 65 degrees in that shelter when it's 20 degrees outside, it is very hard to pass up on that option.
Yeah, when I talked to Corey Miller, it was his first year using the sawtooth last year, and he's like, it's a total game changer. I mean, they got snowed on, they got drenched, they were freezing, it was cold. You know, they were on some bulls. They finally just had to like get out of the weather because they were practically hypothermic. They hiked down to their tent, to their sawtooth, light that fireplace, and boom, you know, they get their core temperature back. They get their clothes dried out again. And literally, where some of those conditions would just make a guy break down mentally and just be like, let's go. This is harsh. This is tough. People don't realize how much, you know, that type of shelter with the fire can really, you know, extend that time in the wilderness for a guy.
I mean, there's someone always gets paid. You know, you can't always have your cake and eat it too. You will get condensation in some situations, and I hear it every day, or not every day. People with questions, or people that have a 4-season shelter and get condensation, or a Kifaru and get it. The thing is when you take a big step back and you look at your options. Yes, you might get condensation in a single wall shelter, but where else can you dry your clothing off after walking through a swamp for 5 miles, come back, condensation or not? It's the only option you've got to be able to actually stay in the woods and dry everything off you own. So, you know, you could say, oh, I hate condensation, I don't want to use a heated shelter. That basically just means you don't like fire and you don't like warmth, because you don't have another option. The only other option is a non-heated shelter, which can suck in a lot of situations.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, it sounds to me like with the floorless shelters or a tarp, that the only time you're not going to use one is if you're basically at super high elevation and there's no trees. And
in bad weather or a lot of bugs.
Okay. And when you say bad weather, you're talking because I mean, you want to use a stove in bad weather, right? I mean,
well, if there's no trees around is the thing, and that's the catch-all.
Okay, so if there's no trees around, you're running a Hilleberg, and Hilleberg's your choice of tent.
Yeah, the Hilleberg's definitely. I've had the best luck with it, and I'll go over a quick list now. Actually, it's a good time of good 4-season and 3-season shelters. As far as 4-season goes, anything in the Hilleberg line is great. You have a couple options. You have a freestanding and then like a tube type tent with Hilleberg, and a Nalo is I screw up the enunciation of the names or pronunciation of the names of the Hillebergs frequently. I think it's pronounced a Nalo, and that one is a tube tent, meaning you have to stake it down to keep it erect, and that's a great option. You also have like a Stika, is a 2-man freestanding, a Soulo, which is probably the most bomb-proof 1-man 4-season shelter that I know about. I've used that one probably as much as any Hilleberg. You can cut the weight down off it, but when I say it's heavy, it's a 1-man shelter with a big vestibule, but it's 5 pounds. It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
But it can handle an insane amount of snow load and wind as well.
How do you know how much these weigh?
What's that?
How do you know how much all these weigh?
So I was lucky enough to One Shot Gear is a internet store just down the road from Kifaru. And those guys have been super cool with the Gritty Bowmen, so we should probably give them a shout out anyway. But they let me set all of them up to get exact weights, check the weights against the catalog. Also check what I could cut off each shelter, meaning you can tweak and, do your own thing with each shelter. So One Shot Gear has all Hilleberg shelters. If you guys are ever looking for one, they let us use these to basically check all the statistics for this podcast. Great group of guys.
They're if guys want to go check them out, they can go to the show notes and we'll have links to a bunch of this stuff. But it's the website is www.1shot gear gear.com, right?
Yep, that's it. And they're all, the cool thing with One Shot Gear is they are mountain hunters, which is great. And Grant, the guy that kind of runs One Shot Gear, he's the long-haired dude that's in the training camp we have. We call him the hippie, the mountain mutt. He's got several names. A little unique kind of a guy, does yoga, doesn't, I don't think he believes in deodorant, from what I understand. It's bad for you. But he's a killing machine, and he's a go-getter. And they have Vortex, Swarovski, Night Force, Hilleberg, Sitka, First Light, Kifaru. They have Blaser rifles. They're Christensen arms dealers. They have a plethora of outdoor gear at their shops. They're a great bunch of dudes. Definitely show your support to them, because they showed it to us, letting me set up. I think I had 13 shelters set up at one time in the back 40 there at One Shot Gear. So they're pretty cool about it.
Okay, so back to what you were saying. The Nalo is a 2-person tent. The Soulo, Soulo, is a 1-person bomb-proof tent. Both those by Hilleberg. What season are those? Are those like 4-season?
Those are both 4-season, both 4-season. And you'll see in the pictures, Brian's going to kind of photo over while we're talking all of these shelters in action. There's a Nalo and there's a Nalo GT, which basically has a huge vestibule in it. In fact, my daughter, when we used to go, so we could all fit in that thing. At that time, I was too poor to afford mini shelters. She would sleep in the vestibule. She was short enough. After about 5'8", you're running out of room. She was short enough to fit in the vestibule, and then Jody and I would sleep in the main tent. So the vestibule's big.
Wow.
On GT versions. Now, there's a little bit of terminology confusion, or I feel confusion in the industry of a company recently started calling shelters 3.5 seasons. And maybe that's gone on for quite a while. It's easier just to say, for confusion's sake, ultralight 3-season and durable 3-season, because a 3-season is a 3-season, a 4 is a 4. There's not really a 3 and, I might make it in 4. You kind of just have the two, and there's a separation, one by the wind load, snow load, and then obviously the inner liner. Now, of course, you can mark anything you want. It's a company. I mean, what does Tommy Boy say? You can put a sticker on a box of poo and it's a guaranteed piece of poo. Well, if it's a 4-season, it's going to be able to handle snow load and wind load very well. So the thing you really want to look at is more of a bomb-proof 3-season and an ultralight 3-season when you drop down off that 4-season tier. Meaning, like, what the outer shell is made of, how many guy lines it has, how thick the poles are. But in the specific case, like a Nyack from Hilleberg, which is one of their new ones, I think they call it a Nyack 1.5. I was able to test that way before it was on the market, and that is, there's such a thing as a 3.5 season, that thing is it. It's really just a very durable 3-season tent that can handle more abuse than most. It's a freestanding tent. I would not sleep 2 men in that thing. You're going to be brokeback mounting the shit out of it if you're in there with two dudes. It is definitely a father-son, father-daughter, or a girlfriend-boyfriend type of a system, because you will be kissing cousins in that thing butt to nut. It is small. But for one guy, it is beautiful. It is unbelievable for one guy. And it's not a bad system. It's not going to handle a blizzard. It's not going to handle a ton of snow, but it'll stand up to quite a bit.
Okay.
So when you go down to like a straight 3-season ultralight tent, which is something like a Big Agnes Fly Creek, I personally call that the paper mache tent. I have a little bias to that because I had those to test before they were on the market, and I did not have great luck with those. Now, I was pushing the envelope with them. In all fairness, I was testing them in high wind. They do not fare well in very high wind. It's a 3-season shelter, but it's also an ultralight 3-season shelter, so it's not going to handle a lot of abuse. That tent for like the one person is like 2 pounds. I think it's 2 pounds, 3 ounces.
Yeah.
Which, hey, you got an inner bug net, you got an outer wall. I can tell you there's not a lot of usable space in that bad boy. You lean it up, your head's rubbing on the top of it.
Dude, Aaron, I bought a Go Light shelter a couple years ago. And it said it was a 2-man, which, by the way,
a 2's a 1.
The 2's a 1, and a 3-man's a 2-man if you're lucky. You don't pay attention to their 1, 2-man, 3-man ratings. Just look at the measurements.
Dude, it's the same way with our 12-man teepee. You're putting 12 guys in there. You might get 12 guys in there, but that's all you're getting. I'd say that.
So when so I bought this shelter, dude, and I first set it up. I climbed in. I was like, oh man, it was like a coffin. It was like a bivy sack. And when I sat up, I can't sit up in it. And since that time, I hated camping in it, dude. I hated it every time I set it up. It was hard to get comfortable or do anything in because the ceiling was so low. And for me now, if the ceiling isn't high enough, I don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, if you got to lean on your elbow all the time when you're in there, do the forearm lean.
Yep.
It is kind of counterproductive in comparison to another shelter.
Yeah, trying to get dressed in there and stuff like that is just maddening. I hated it. So that's a big deal to me. The other thing is with these ultralight, like the Big Agnes Fly Creek, if the whole point of bringing the shelter to me is for when everything goes south and the weather's nasty and the wind's blowing hard and it's pouring rain or even snowing, when you least expect it, at least if you're early season September and it just goes south and it's now pouring rain and the wind is gushing. I want to be able to, the whole point of having a shelter is to protect me from that. And some of these that are ultra lightweight, they're great as long as the weather's good. It's kind of like a backpack. It's great until you kill something and you actually have to put a load in it.
And that is something that everyone needs to listen to again. There will be a ton of guys that own a Big Agnes Fly Creek right now. As soon as they listen to this, they're probably, the moment they listen, typing a message to me and Brian immediately of how you've used it and it was great and you love it. I guarantee 100% you are correct in the specific case that you had while you were in the mountains out west. I bet it was great. Where it wasn't great for me, or it may not be great for someone else, is if it happens to snow or you happen to catch a very high wind at a specific time and it blows down. And, point in case here, I will not mention the specific tent company, but Derek and I were scouting for sheep when he drew a sheep tag a couple years ago. And we went in early, and Derek had used this specific shelter. And Derek's a very good friend, and he's super funny, but this, probably get yelled at for telling this story. But he was sold on this tent. It was 2 pounds. 2 pounds with a vestibule. It was awesome, right? I mean, it was unbelievable. Well, that bad boy blew down that night, and he had to get in my tent at 2:00 in the morning. He had used it probably on 9 to 10 different backpacking trips and hunting trips and had a great time. Well, we happened to come out of the timber. We camped on this plateau. When we got there, everything was, peaches and cake, right? Everything's great. Well, I'm like, dude, there's a storm coming, or he's telling me, and I can't remember. And I have photos of this storm rolling in, and I'm looking at his shelter thinking he's not going to make it through the night in that shelter the way this wind is coming in. And I was in Hilleberg. Well, his tent blew to pieces that night. I mean, there was stuff scattered, 4 points to compass, tent poles, and everything else. Now, you know, the reason why we had four-season shelters is we had kind of, I mean, honestly, if we were in the tree line, we would have brought, you know, one of my stoves and teepees or whatever, because it was cold, right? It was early. It was in the spring when we were scouting, but we knew we'd be above tree line. It turns out that ultimate shelter he had camped in many times, that one time, if he was farther in or he was injured, he could have died. I mean, it snowed that night and everything else. And so I guess what I'm saying is everything's perfect in a perfect world. You step out of perfection, things can go downhill fast.
Yeah. So that said, then Aron, what is your number one recommendation for a solo guy for a 4-season backpack tent?
For a 4-season, a tent would be for one guy would be a Hilleberg Soulo, and then for a tarp teepee type of system would be a Kifaru Supertarp with a 18-inch or 12-inch cylinder stove. The next would be, you know, kind of bracketing it out, the bigger.
How big a stove did you say?
12 or 18-inch cylinder. I run the 18-inch cylinder in mine.
Well, that's what I was going to say is, I mean, it seems like the 18-inch would be a lot easier to get wood into.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's
and burn longer, too. Like, as it is, it's sort of like a flash fire, and you got to keep putting wood in it, right? I mean, tell me
it's a 15-minute burn time. It can get a little redundant stuffing wood in that bad boy when it's cold. Because now, if it's like 30, you don't want to stuff wood in it very much, right? Okay. It's just cold enough to warm up.
So I'm going to ask you about techniques for using the shelter, but before I get into that, in the fire and all that kind of stuff, finish what you were saying. So you've got the Soulo 1-person bomb-proof 4-season tent for just a one guy. That's a Hilleberg. But your other 4-season option is the Kifaru Supertarp with a 12 to 18-inch stove. What else? What about the megatarp?
So, and that's where we'll kind of, you know, you start to branch out. When you go to a megatarp, it's more of a 2-person shelter. And so, and then that would be kind of up against a Nalo GT or Nalo from Hilleberg would be equivalent to like a megatarp. Whether you run into kind of your decision, you take a megatarp and a stove and compare it to a Nalo, you're basically the same weight. You might even save a little with the, you know, the Kifaru compared to the Hilleberg, and that's including the stove weight, but they're about the same footprint, same size. So, you know, it is a bonus having the stove. If you don't have any wood, obviously the Hilleberg's a good option. So those are 2-man shelters, though, you know, and you can run the megatarp with one guy, because I do it all the time. It's a lot of room in there. So if you like a lot of room, the megatarp is a good option.
Okay. How much is the weight difference between the Supertarp and the megatarp?
With, you know, realistic weight, tax title and license, pegs and poles, you're at about 20 ounces it's about a 10-ounce difference.
Okay.
Actually, it's a 14-ounce difference now because we put zippered entries on the megatarp. Now, when you go to the lighter weight system, 3-season, I would suggest for one man the Big Agnes Copper Spur for an ultralight, for a 3-season heavy duty, the Hilleberg Nyack, and then for the tarp system, a Kifaru Supertarp or Paratarp, for a lighter weight system, meaning no stove, just the tarp.
So the Paratarp or the what?
Supertarp. Okay. And that's kind of the beauty of the Supertarp, because you can put an entry on that and burn it with a stove, or you can take the entryway off or the vestibule off, the annex, and take that off, and you can just run it as a flat tarp.
Okay. So the Supertarp is kind of versatile. You can use it just as a flat tarp, or you can actually convert it for a stove.
I'd marry that thing if I could. Yeah, it's nice. It can do just about anything. Cooks, cleans, brushes your teeth.
So what about it being a little too small? Like,
It's small for 2 dudes, I can tell you that.
But is it how big is it for one guy?
Oh, it's big for one guy.
Now, we talked about this before. You're not a fan of sharing your tent.
No, not at all.
So you like to bring your own shelter. And so for you, you're really looking at one-man setups most of the time.
Right, exactly. When I need to go to a 2-man setup for 4C, I carry a sawtooth, which is one of our systems, and I'll go into those in a second.
And the sawtooth, okay. Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah, we're almost there. Just when you look at the different, as you're bracketing down, you know what I mean? You got 4 season. Do I need that? 3 season, ultralight season. You know, if you're going to make the decision of what you need, generally people have made their decisions beforehand before they even talk to me. They just need reassured, which is understandable. I need the same thing with camera gear. So if you're like, hey, I'm hunting the first 7 days of archery season in Colorado, and I think I'm just going to run a tarp. Am I going to be okay? Yeah, I mean, you're going to be fine, right? And then if guys are hunting, and they don't like, they're scared of not having a floor, they're not comfortable with that, that type of a thing, get an ultralight 3-season tent. You'll be fine. You just kind of have to assess it. But as you bracket it down, the bivvies I would suggest, and then we'll finish this portion up, would be the RAB bivvies, R-A-B. They are by far, they're made of event. They are by far the best bivvy sacks I've ever used. The Alpine bivvy is your standard coffin type bivvy, no hoop, no nothing. The Ridgemaster, which some of you guys have seen that have listened in my photos, that's the kind of the olive drab orange model. It's got a hoop. That one is a very bomb-proof bivvy. It's kind of heavy. But those are the bivvies that I would suggest. I have not had any luck with many other bivvies other than RAB.
Okay. So where does the Nyack and the Anjan fit in?
So the Nyack and the Anjan. The Nyack, for example, that is your very, very durable 3-season shelter. The Nyack would be my choice. It's freestanding for a lot of things.
It's one person.
The Anjan is bigger though.
Okay.
So
is the Anjan 2-person and the Nyack 1-person?
Well, the Nyack, I think they call it a 1.5.
Okay.
Yeah, but the Anjan is a 2-person.
Okay.
And you can get an Anjan GT. It's got a huge vestibule.
And those are really 3-season.
They're definitely 3-season.
So for warmer weather but harsh conditions.
Yep.
And you'd use those pretty much at high elevation where there's no wood.
Yeah, as long as they're not not in 4-season. 3-season conditions, definitely.
Okay. Okay. So I got questions.
Lay it on me.
Okay. So if you're a 2-person dude, because, I look at the Supertarp with the stove as a 1-person guy, and how much weight am I talking right there for the combo?
So this, for the Supertarp, you said?
Yep.
I'll just break it down so you guys can understand how it works. The Supertarp by itself weighs 16 ounces. You add steaks, an MSR groundhog's about a half an ounce per steak. Mm-hmm. You're going to add almost 8 ounces for steaks to stake everything out.
Okay.
So now you're 24 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
Then I usually throw in a little bit of extra there for cord or whatever. So what were we at? 24, so 26 ounces. And then you're going to add 1 pound, 9 ounces. So for the stove. That's the pipe and the stove. So what are we at there? So that's 26, 36, 42, 52, 51. So you're about, 50 to 51, 52 ounces for the whole system. That's the stove and everything else.
Okay. So 50. You're looking at basically little over 3 pounds, 3.2 pounds or something.
I would just tell everybody 3.5 pounds.
Okay, so 3.5 pounds is what I'm looking at for the Supertarp with a stove. So let's back up then. Let's say I'm bringing a sawtooth with a stove. That's a 2-person setup. It's actually really big, comfortable.
Dude, it's huge. And we sell so many sawtooths because it is like the ultimate backpacking comfort shelter. I'm not gonna lie, like you can't beat it when it comes to happiness, because you can fit 2 dudes that are 7 foot tall with gear, 5 days of firewood.
You can stand up, completely stand up in it.
Yeah, and it's under 7 pounds with the stove.
So,
and it's giant.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is you're 7 pounds there. So if you take that, if you're going with 2 guys and you divide that in half, you're at 3.5 pounds.
Yeah, I always just tell people 3.5 to 4.
So you're roughly the same weight with 2 guys. You split it up. So, I guess, do you have more room in a sawtooth than a Supertarp?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So for the same weight, if there's 2 guys going, you basically get much more shelter out of it.
Yeah, for sure. And you got a lot of. The thing that's nice is 2 guys can sit in those ultralight chairs on a sawtooth. Mm-hmm. You literally sit straight up and talk back and forth, feed the fire, everything else. And and Patrick and I argue. Well, we don't argue. The father-son, right? Old dog, young dog thing. He's a gun hunter. I'm a bow hunter. In bow season, dude, I run and gun, and I go full retard at the blink of an eye. I'm like, we're going 17 miles that way to go shoot that 5-point because I want to. You don't really need a sawtooth for that, right? If you're running and gunning and everything else, you don't need it as much. That's why I run a tarp. Mm-hmm. But you get into bad weather, I'm a completely different person. I'm like, hey, let's talk about it some more and feed the fire. This is nice. It's different. And so, like when we're shed hunting, we just had a 12-man on that last trip, and I'll send you some photos to post up for those. But the sawtooth, my buddy, my hunting partner and his brother, one of them 6'10", one of them 6'8". The guy that's 6'8" is about 300 pounds, 280. The one that's 6'10" is about 260. They're not exactly a set of cartridges. They're big dudes. And they run that sawtooth for everything because they're just too damn big for anything else. They're huge. Yeah. And Alaska, they backpack in areas and go hunt, whatever, and they've got room for everything they need.
So what about the megatarp?
Now, the megatarp is basically perfect for 2 guys going ultralight.
And what about the megatarp for 1 person?
I know a ton of guys. If you like a lot of room, mm-hmm. I would pick the megatarp. It's the same height all the way down. Mm-hmm. I would get the megatarp over the Supertarp if you like a lot of room. Or the question I constantly get, I go solo mostly, but sometimes I bring a friend. Don't get the Supertarp, get the mega.
So how much are we talking weight-wise increase between the Supertarp and megatarp?
I think it's 14 ounces.
Total.
And even though I weighed everything else, that I didn't weigh those. Yeah, I think it's 14 ounces.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
So you're talking about another pound.
Yeah. And to go kind of coincide with the 4-season options here, when you're looking at like with the Hilleberg, the I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. The Chitum is a 4-season tube tent, which is huge. The Nalo GT 2 and 3, those are all equivalent floor space options. You can't stand up in them. You guys, when you're trying to figure out what you want to get, just run the numbers to figure out, the weight penalty, and then figure out where you're going and what you're comfortable with. Because I can tell you, you run the numbers on something the size of a sawtooth compared to anything in a 4-season standpoint, the sawtooth's going to crush it in usable space and heat with the weight of the stove combined.
Yeah,
and it's not a biased opinion. I run Hillebergs. The sawtooth crushes everything.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is if I were to sit back, like you said before, anyone that has used a fireplace, a stove inside of a shelter knows what we're talking about. I mean, if you've run if you've had a stove inside of a wall tent, you're talking about similar conditions. I mean, it's hard to beat the comfort that comes with that, dude. It's just, you can't compete with that.
It is very difficult to, and like the shed hunting this last go around, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could have stayed without a stove if we wanted to. But dude, I don't sleep. I got up, I'm sitting in my chair, my water's frozen. I start the stove. About 15 minutes later, I'm down to my shorts and a t-shirt, and I'm throwing crap at everybody else to get up, and they snap the flip up right there. All right, it's warm, I'm getting out of bed. Let's go shed hunting. Where it's not fun to get out of bed, you know, when there's no heat.
Yeah.
And once you have that heat source, it is hard to walk away from to use a different shelter. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. So let's say you take, you know, I'm sold on having a stove. The only time I see myself not hunting with a stove is early season. And for me, ideally, that's just a tarp. That's what we've talked about that before. I like having just a tarp as an option. Now, if I'm dealing with bugs, then a shelter would be nice. Just a not a floorless, but an actual tent. And so for that early season stuff, you're talking about a copper spur, Big Agnes copper spur, or maybe a Nyack or an anjan.
An anjan. Another company to look at is good lordy, I forgot the name of it. That's horrible of me. Dang, I'm just kidding about that. Henry Shires. Shires. They make a great shelter.
Okay, so then we're talking, but it, you know, basically though, bugs aside, and if you have wood, I'm thinking if you're two guys, the sawtooth is the way to go. And if you're one guy, you don't want to share a shelter and you want to go, you know, on your own, Supertarp, and then you can run the stove whenever the weather is a little colder. So you can leave the stove at home if you want, or you can bring it. But the Supertarp.
Yep. And if you're an old two guys, ultralight, they're wanting to save weight, the megatarp.
Okay. So back to like how you run. Explain to me how you set up the stove and how because we talked about this before. Some people have this misconception that if they get the stove, all of a sudden, they can fill it with some wood and it's going to burn for 10 hours. And that's not how it's done at all. And there's some technique to getting the wood, drying it out, finding the wood, that kind of thing. So run me through your how you would, when you pitch it, you get started, kind of how do you run your sawtooth, Supertarp, megatarp shelter with a stove?
Okay, cool. And I'll go, this is just, if the same thing happens every time we go. I get there because I'm so used to setting up the shelters. I drop down, set up the shelter, and if I need help, my buddy helps me. When we're done with that, my buddy goes straight to gathering firewood. I go straight to putting the stove together. When I'm done putting the stove together and everything's ready to go and it's sticking through the hole and everything else, my buddy grabs his gear, starts laying it out inside the shelter. I go back to gathering more wood if needed. When I'm done with that, I go to setting my gear up. He puts his day pack together. I pop out. He's putting his day pack together as quick as he can during that time. The wood that you need is about the size of your thumb down to your pinky finger, never bigger than a Red Bull can to burn in these stoves. And a pile, I posted that photo of the wood pile we had. That lasted that night and that morning. Of me burning it pretty continuously. So 6 hours of burning probably is what that pile of wood lasted. People think you have to bring an axe or a saw. The wood that you're burning in these stoves is dead. You're not going to burn green wood right off the tree worth of crap. So it's all the branches that are dead on the bottom of the trees. You snap those off, the stuff laying around. You just put your foot down with the 12 inches sticking out of the other side of it and pick it up and it snaps off. You can expect anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes upwards to 30 on the bigger stoves of a burn time before it's out. So not a long time, but the concept is, obviously when you're awake, you just throw a stick in every now and then. It's kind of rhythmic anyway, but I stuff that thing with as much wood as I possibly can before I go to bed. Everybody gets in the fart sack, zip up, everybody's happy. We pass out in a coma-like sleep the next morning, which is generally me. I stick my head back out of the fart sack. I start the fire back up, throw a bunch of wood in there, climb back in, wait about 15 minutes. It's magically now 65 to 70 in the teepee or the sawtooth or whatever, and everybody gets out and gets their stuff together to head out for the day.
And do you usually start the fire with trioxane tablets, or? I
use about a quarter of a trioxane tablet.
Okay.
Now you can use grass or whatever, but I'm lazy, so I generally don't. When I say lazy, meaning I don't want to wait and I don't want to put effort into it. I just throw trioxane and I throw some sticks on top of it and lay back in my bed, and I don't have to worry about it. Now, in a Supertarp and a megatarp, when I say crawl back in for 15 minutes, it does not take that long. It's got less space inside, so that thing heats up quick. So, I mean, I've gotten it, I'm sure, over 100 degrees in a Supertarp before. I know Jeremy and Colton, two of my hunting partners, last year they brought up the only stove I had for them, and it was an Arctic stove in a sawtooth. I think they got it to 119 or 127. It was one of the in that sawtooth, and it was snowing outside, so it was below freezing. And they got it so hot, I came in there, and Colton was laying his underwear as low to the ground as he possibly could, and he actually fell asleep on top of his sleeping bag and woke up shivering because, it goes back to the outer, it goes back to the temperature you're outside, whatever it is outside after the stove burns off. Climbed in his bag, and then, next morning they woke it up and warmed up and we went fishing. So,
yeah. So it seems like to me, like one thing about running your cook stove, your gas stove inside like a 4-season Hilleberg, it'll warm that sucker up too, and it'll trap the heat in there. But I have noticed that it's a wet heat when you're running butane, and I don't know about white gas. I mean,
well, you'll die from carbon monoxide poisoning by the time you dry anything off.
Whereas with the stove, you really do get a dry heat, and it's where like I've been in a wall tent before. You got wet boots and socks and jackets, and you can hang those up on some clotheslines in there, which the sawtooth has some spots for that. You can dry your stuff out pretty darn quick.
Well, last year on that fishing trip we went on, Colton fell off a log in the river, so he's fully submerged. I saw him fall off the log, and I said, I think I'll just walk across. And I waited, belly button deep, boots on and everything, knowing we had the stoves. Everybody else followed suit, but we had teepees. So I had a Supertarp. I, generally sleep solo, and my boots, my insoles, and every bit of clothing I had was bone dry the next morning when we went fishing. Just from that night, we went to bed, got dark at 8. I stayed up till probably stayed up. I was in the teepee at 6:30 to 7. I had the stove going the entire time, fell asleep at 8, woke back up, at 4, and so for 2 more hours, had heat going around it, and everything was bone dry when I got back out at 8 o'clock to go fishing.
Got it.
Now, Colton had his teepee at 120, so his crap was dry, guaranteed, that night, because he had clotheslines. My Supertarp, I've got some clotheslines in there to hang my stuff off of, but I generally put my boots beside the stove up on the wood pile.
Okay, so what do you recommend if you've got 3 or 4 guys?
So it's pretty simple. A sawtooth or a 4-man teepee is 2 guys. 3 guys is a 6-man or an 8-man. 4 guys, a 6-man maybe, but an 8-man definitely. 4 guys in gear, stove and wood is in an 8-man. You can fit like 3 kids, husband and wife, and a dog in an 8-man, but it's usually better to go a 12-man. You got a little bit more room. And we go up to a 24-man, which is like the party shelter.
Yeah.
But that bad boy costs some money. Dude, it's huge. So I've set one up 4 or 5 times for the rendezvous. It's big. I mean, there'll be 20 people in that thing.
That'd be sweet. So tell me about, like, for my own family, like I got 3 daughters, my wife, you know, I want to make sure that they're comfortable and cozy, but most likely I'll be carrying most of the load. How much does one of those, so you're saying like an 8-man would work for us?
Yeah. And I would suggest,
or a 12-man,
an 8-man for backpacking in, and a 12-man you can backpack in. But probably an 8-man for backpacking and a 12-man if you're doing more car camping.
Okay. So
now, you know,
with an 8-man, you could fit small 3 kids under 12 years old.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, you'd be amazed at how many people pack in a 12-man teepee. Because what happens is a lot of like late season rifle hunter guys, there'll be 4 of them.
Yeah.
They'll backpack in and they split it up accordingly. One guy's got the shelter, one guy's got the stove, one guy's got the food. So they're all hauling 5 pounds, you know, roughly, give or take, but maybe 6 pounds. But they're also have all the room in the world in the blizzard. So
yeah. How much does the 8-man setup weigh?
I'm pulling that out right now, so I don't give crappy data. I got a little spreadsheet here, so give me 1 sec.
Okay.
And I mean, you've seen some of the
teepees look sweet, Aaron.
Well, you've seen the photo I just posted. I think you posted it on Gritty Bowmen. That was a 12-man. We had 4 guys in there. I mean, we could have had a party.
That looks like a castle, man.
So an 8-man is 7 pounds 9 ounces, and that's with the pole and the pegs and the seam sealer and the bag. So it's probably like 7 pounds 5 ounces. And then the 12-man. Give me 1 second.
It's just not that heavy for how big it is, dude.
No, it's not bad. 12-man's 11 pounds 1 ounce, and it's probably like 10, 14 because the seam sealer, we're weighing a whole tube because you have to seam seal them when you get them. And then the sawtooth, I think it's 4.5 pounds. And it's, let's see here. So it's 4 pounds 8 ounces. So it's probably like 4.6.
So tell me about Corey Miller talked about having some critters like a skunk come inside of his.
That was the first time I'd heard a skunk. I've had mice come in mine before.
I know last year when I was sleeping under the tarp, I got robbed a couple times from squirrels and chipmunks eating through to my food bag. So what do you do there?
Well, the problem, I wouldn't say problem. The thing is the bottom of a 4-season shelter is not Kevlar kryptonite hybrid. So when I've had mice issues in a shelter, I've also had them in a tarp or teepee. I've also had them in a shelter. It's just easier access for them to get into a
floorless,
floorless, right?
But they can still chew through your 4-season and get right in.
I only say that because I've got a couple 4-seasons with big patched holes in the bottom from mice eating through.
Yeah, me too. Us too. We've had them chew right through. And
I just hang my food up either outside or off that cord.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you pretty much hang your food up every time?
Oh, I'm horrible about it. I never hang my food up. So when I say I hang my food up, I don't. In bear country, I don't. I cook in my shelter. I'm bad. Like I'm like the poster child for unsafety. It's not good. And I mean, dude, I've literally left bone-in meat in my tent before because I was too late. You know what I mean? Like I was like, I'll hang it. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I'll just throw it in my tent with me. But
that's kind of dumb.
Yeah, it's horrible. But if you have a bear tag, it makes life simpler. I don't know if that's really baiting, right? You're not baiting. It's just it happened to be there. No, if we make jokes about that all the time. The safety of Aron Snyder. You should not eat in your tent. You should hang your food up outside, away from your area, especially in grizzly country. And when I say bear areas, black bear, not grizzly. I don't hunt that much in grizzly areas. The mice issue, most areas I go to don't have mice problems. There's some marmot issues. I've never had a marmot get in my shelter and eat anything. I have just having it laying on the side of the mountain and glassing. They've come over to, eat the salt off your shoulder straps.
Mm-hmm.
I just stay fairly cognizant of what I'm, doing as far as important things. I've had my shoes eaten before, both in a 3 season and a 4 season, or both in a floorless and a floored shelter, because I leave my boots in the vestibule.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a tent, put your boots on the inside. If you're in a floored shelter, and you have important things, hang them up if you need to. It doesn't happen as often as you would think. It actually is it's more the exception than the rule for rodents and stuff, but it does happen.
Yeah, we were in Mount Emily, and we were driving. It was our first time hunting in that unit in Oregon, and everybody had their car hood up. And I'm like, why do they have their car hood up? Like every camping spot. Well, there's pack rats out there, and they crawl into your engine compartment, and they just chew up wires and nest and all of that. So we didn't know that. So some guy came over to our camp after 3 days, and Anthony's truck hadn't moved, and he's like, dude, how come you don't have your hood up? And we're like, well, why would we? He's like, well, the rodents climb in there, and they'll chew up and wreck your they like something in there. And he's like, what? Sure enough, we go in there. His truck won't start because it had chewed the wires, and there was already nesting in there and something inside of his up in the engine compartment. And we had a toy hauler up there, and we had a pack rat move into the toy hauler, and I couldn't get that thing out of the toy hauler for like a month or two after I brought it home. And it would go around and grab we were missing our cell phones, the shiny like BlackBerry, and our spoons and our pop cans. And I'm like, dude, someone's been in here. And sure enough, we opened the cabinet underneath the sink, and there is a pile of our stuff underneath the sink there. And we moved into a wall tent, and we were inside a wall tent sleeping, and Anthony wakes us up. He's like, dude, guys, there's something in here. And we're like, he's like, it's on my feet. And so he's like, you got a headlamp? And so I shine a headlamp over there, and there is a pack rat the size of like a possum on his feet. I mean, this thing's massive, and we didn't know what it was, by the way. At the time, it looked like it just had that nasty rat look, though, with the beady eyes. And he's like, oh my gosh, look at the size of that thing. And so he grabs a boot, and he just nails it with the boot, like a heavy boot, and just throws it and hits this thing. The boot just hits the thing and kind of bounces off, and the thing didn't move. And he's like, did you see that? Did you see that?
Sounded like a man.
That's right. And so it jumps off and starts exploring the floor. And my cousin Ben, who's just can't be bothered, he just rolls over and goes, who cares? And goes back to sleep. I'm like, dude, there is a giant rat in here. So I grab a log by the wood stove, and I'm like, this is how you do it, Anthony. This is how you handle this. And I walked over there, and I took that log, and I took aim, and I didn't play baseball or anything like that. I missed, but when I missed, it ran at me and ran up my legs. And I may have let out a sound that resembled that of a female. And then it ran out the hole underneath the flap on the front of the wall tent. Well, for the course of that whole week, we would have 2 or 3 giant rats like that inside of our tent every night.
Well, in Idaho, I slept on the floor in the airport until I caught the plane. Plane was delayed. Ended up, my gallbladder acted up. Took some Vicodin or Oxycontin, something. I don't know. Ryan picked me up, drops me off in the middle of nowhere, 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whatever. Hike in, and my wife had made me this banana bread, and set up the tarp in the bivvy. And I'm not paying attention. Usually I put all that inside. I wake up the next morning, and I left my banana bread out, and I pick up the Ziploc bag, and I can see chocolate chips in there. And I'm like, oh, she threw chocolate chips, and that's weird. I'm looking, I'm like, oh, man, that's rat. That's not good. So I set it down, it ate the tongue off of my boot, every part of the tongue, all the, like the first 4 inches, right? So there's no tongue where the top of the boot is all the way down.
Must have been the salt.
Dude, well, what's funny is, so Lane and Ryan hike in the next day, and Lane is a funny kid. It's Ryan's son. Skinny as a rail, right? A mellow as can be, like, doesn't ever, hey, guys, you know, what's going on? So Lane is sleeping, and this pack rat is running up and down the side, because Lane didn't have a shelter. He's running up and down the side of the sleeping bag, jumping over Lane. And I'm throwing food on the sleeping bag because I'm an ass, and it's parked on top of Lane. Yeah, and this thing's got a tail like 12 inches long, right? Whatever it is, it's got a huge tail, and it's just a giant rat. And then there's mice running around Lane and everything else. Now, it had just thawed, obviously, and everything was coming out. But for me, I didn't have anything to eat through my shelter. I had a bivvy. I just threw everything inside the bivvy throughout the course of the day. Nothing bugged it. But I was also stuck with no tongue on my boot for a while because, you know, it ate it off. I didn't have another set. So yeah, rodents can be a problem in any situation, but it can be a problem.
Yeah, I have found though that, you know, when you hear guys talk about a floorless shelter and the downsides to a floorless, my experience is that most of that is really in a person's head. The reality is the benefits far outweigh the downside. And we've talked about this when it comes to a tarp as well. Just a lot of guys who are like creeped out by not having a zipper and it fully enclosed. The reality is bugs and rodents and those sorts of things are very uncommon, and the benefits of having a floorless shelter just kind of outweigh that. Mostly it's in your head, but if it's in your head, it's in your head, you know?
Yeah. And that's the thing is, if you can't get it out of your head, then, I mean, get a floored shelter. It's just, in Colorado, the killer of Colorado is the altitude, you know, not the rodents, right? You go to other areas and maybe mosquitoes and maybe rodents, where here, you got a marmot problem, right? They're doing pull-ups on your brake lines when you leave the freaking parking lot or whatever, you know, they eat everything, but you don't have a big rodent problem or a mosquito problem up high. And, you know, I'm lucky enough I get to travel to multiple different states and go hunting or helping or photograph or whatever. And, you know, in Washington, I never had any problem with rodents where I was at. I had a problem with mosquitoes, you know, horrible mosquitoes, no rodents at all to speak of. And so that, you know, you always have to, not to say it again, but assess the situation, figure out where you're going, and then just, you know, kind of make your decision on your shelter from that.
Yeah. I'll tell you that when I hiked into Prince of Wales Island up to the Alpine area where I'm chasing bucks, it poured rain like Noah's flood. And I had just bought a Mountain Hardware Sky Ledge or something like that, a 3-man, which really I was shoulder to shoulder in it with my brother-in-law and the two of us up there. There was no wood to burn, really, up there. And the rain came down like crazy. It was fairly warm still, but I mean, it was flooding. And underneath the tent, it was like no matter where we went, there was like sheets of water running off this alpine top. And so hiking down a long ways to where we could get down to where there's trees, you know, I guess having a shelter, I don't know, man, it was awful steep. I'm trying to think of how I could have used a floorless shelter there. I don't think I could have up on those alpine tops.
Oh yeah. And there's some places it's just not feasible. But anyway, you know,
we got wet, and we were wet the whole 7 days. There's no drying anything out.
Yeah. And that's another, you know, thing as far as, you know, yeah, you bring up a good point. Obviously, 90% of the time you're going to be able to find wood in wet areas. But in the case of like Prince of Wales, that's horrible. BC's got areas like that where, you know, there's no trees and it pisses rain every day. You know, you're kind of stuck with one decision no matter what you want.
Yeah. I could see, you know, there was times where we just rented a local car there, a little Toyota Tacoma. Had we had some sort of, and we stayed there at the truck a couple of nights, had we had a shelter, it would have been with a stove we could have set something up on alongside one of the logging roads we were on, and then there would have been wood to burn, and we could have dried some things out. As it was, we tried to dry it out in the cab of the truck, which you're running the truck the whole time, and it's not as comfortable, and you can't lay down in a little Toyota, which I hate those trucks, by the way. I swear I feel like I'm sitting on the floor whenever I ride in one of those. But some people love them. You had one for a long time, right? 4Runner?
Yeah, I've had, 4Runner, Tacomas, Tundras. I've had a bunch of different ones, but yeah. But I tell you what, we should probably finish this up because I just looked. I've got 37 text messages, so I'm getting backed up.
Okay, did we miss anything in this podcast? We're basically.
I would. The biggest thing again, figure out where you're going. You know, the time of year, a projected forecast, doesn't have to be perfect, of the weather, and make your decision off of that. And also project the future. If you are telling me you're only going hunting in early season or September, but you may end up going on a rifle hunt occasionally and backpack in, you probably want to get some type of tarp, a teepee system with a stove, or a 4-season shelter. Don't judge it off of what you're going to be doing that year. Judge it off also of what you're going to be doing in the future, or buy 2 shelters. You only got, only really 2 options. I guess what I'm saying is make sure you try to predict the future of what you might be doing as well if you're trying to stay on a budget when it comes to shelters. And there's nothing wrong with, if you're financially strapped a bit, you can always buy like a REI quarter dome tent or something to get you by. I mean, God, don't let it keep you off the mountain. It's just as time goes on, or, you're out in the woods a bunch, a heated shelter, a 4-season shelter, whatever the case may be, can be worthwhile. Just try and predict where you're going to be and what you may be doing in the future to save you money.
All right. Okay. So, one last shout out for One Shot Gear, the #1 shot gear. Go check out their website. They were awesome. They helped us do all this. As far as, we'll put show notes together for this podcast. So, by the way, we've got, Justin Clement has been helping us. He's a friend of Gritty Bowmen, and he's helping us, improve the show notes. He's going to help us get a newsletter out. We haven't been very good about that, and we've got a lot of information that we can condense into one newsletter we send out like each week. So if you haven't signed up for the Gritty Bowmen newsletter, go do that. We're going to start next week, maybe this week even, sending out information about the show. And these things like what Aron just discussed, we try to put those show notes about the tents and just different information from the podcast there to summarize it in some lists, especially like with your backpack gear list and things like that. We put that in the podcast on the website. But if you sign up for the newsletter, we're going to start putting the show notes in there for the shows that occurred in between each newsletter. So if that comes to your inbox, you can just get a quick list with some links and stuff in there, and it can just be handed to you. So sign up for the newsletter for that. We'll put other information like where we're going to be and other podcasts that we've recorded that are in the pipeline to get released and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's it. Aron, anything else?
No, that's it. I may have double loaded the photos into the Dropbox files. You may have a lot of doubles in there. Trying to multitask. No, I think that's it.
Okay.
Make sure and like Brian's Instagram page. Don't forget that.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, help me beat Aron.
Oh, that's funny. All right, cool, man.
Thanks, man. Stay gritty.
Yep, see ya.
Bye. Okay, gritty friends, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. If you did, please take a moment to leave us a review on iTunes, Podbean, or Stitcher. We love reading your reviews. And connect with us on social media if you're on there. Look us up on Facebook and Instagram, and take a moment to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can receive notifications when we upload new videos. We've got a sweet deal with Mountain Ops. You get 20% off on all Mountain Ops supplements, combo packs, and apparel when you type in the word gritty at checkout. If you're a hardcore elk hunter, or you want to be, go to the Elk 101 website online and check them out. Our friend Corey Jacobson is killing it with some of the best elk hunting information and entertainment on the web. If you haven't heard, we're doing a huge gear giveaway to try and grow and expand the gritty community on Facebook and Instagram. I asked a bunch of friends to pitch in on this gear giveaway, and they all came through with some awesome stuff. Our friends at Kifaru, Rockslide, First Light, Phelps Game Calls, One Shot Gear, Mountain Ops, XXX Archery, Blacktail Outdoors, and Is It September Yet are pitching in some sweet gear for the giveaway. We'll announce all the details in the next few weeks. All you have to do to be entered to win is like our Gritty Bowmen Facebook page and follow us on Instagram. All right, friends, let me leave you with one other quote from Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "It behooves every man to remember that the work of the critic is of altogether secondary importance, and that, in the end, progress is accomplished by the man who does things." We all have a choice. We can be people who do things or people who criticize the work of others. It's pretty simple, really. Get out there and do your thing. Good luck on your hunts, and stay gritty.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to the Gritty Bowmen.
Gritty Bowmen.